My personal story of grief and loss started in 2019. 38 years old, finally decided to have a baby. Didn't really want a baby my whole life. My upbringing wasn't really conducive with thinking it would be a good idea to raise more kids. But I fell in love and we wanted a baby. The rest is history. Got pregnant pretty quickly. Had a healthy pregnancy, healthy baby, healthy mom, some really awful hyperemesis. So that sucked, but everything was great, felt cute, felt like a sacred vessel, all that stuff, glowing. And I had planned to have a home birth with my midwife and good friend. We only lived a literally 4 minute drive from the hospital. So I thought conservatively, like that's close enough for me. Um, so I went into labor on his due date, actually, November 24th, 2019. And we set up the home birthing pool and all that stuff. And I was in labor for 12 or 15 hours. I can't quite remember. Shockingly painful. No matter what they tell you, you do not expect that level of pain. Um, and yeah, I had been laboring for some time and we were all resting, trying to have a little nap. And I felt this deep tug inside my belly, which later on, now I know, like that's when something started to go wrong, but I did not know what to expect. It was my first birth, first labor, didn't know what was normal. We went to the hospital at one point during labor for some pain relief and just double check things. And they sent me home. Everything was fine. Go home and continue. Then right after that tug, I kind of was like, oh, I really wanted to wake everybody up and be like, get up, like something doesn't feel right. I definitely had that feeling, but I just thought, you don't know what birth is like. I didn't know what to expect. I thought I was overreacting. And then it was nothing. And then I got a bit of a fever. So we decided to go to the hospital. I was getting feverish, which I was vomiting a lot too, because I had bad hyperemesis. So with the vomiting, the dehydration, we thought, nah, let's just go to the hospital. Um, so we got to the hospital. Everything was fine for about 20 minutes. I was hooked up to all the monitoring equipment. And then the the monitors detected some fetal distress. I remember just beep, 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 like, and the room just instantly filled with people. Like, there must have been 25 people in there. It seemed like to me, anyways. And I was 8 centimeters dilated at that time. And I remember people on either side of me just like yanking my legs up beside my head and saying, like, push, push, and just screaming bloody murder, pushing as hard as I could and not being able to get him out. So they were like, we have to do an emergency C-section. The baby's really in distress and bumping me, like go-karting me down the hallway because the stretcher had like a broken wheel on it, and getting into the OR and asking like, do I get to stay awake for this? Not quite realizing, I think, the level of emergency. And all I remember was somebody saying no time and just putting the mask over my face. So I woke up to a room with the tension so thick, like it was palpable, the distress and horror that was in that room. And they wheeled me beside my son, who was laying just like on a medical table, non-responsive, eyes closed. And they said, we managed to resuscitate him. um, what's his name? And I told them, I decided in that moment, I said, from one of our top list, and said his name is Wilder. And they said, the helicopter's on its way here to airlift your husband and your son out to Women and Children's Hospital. He's going to need some extra support, and you can't go with him. I waited 8 hours to join them. I had to have x-rays and then get in an ambulance and cross a ferry over to Vancouver. It was the longest wait of my life. During that time, I received a photo from my husband who was in the helicopter with my son. And it was just that he had the little blinders on and the little vest and all these tubes. And it was just probably the worst moment, the first worst moment of my life. Um, and then getting to the hospital and having them like checking me in and wanting me to stay in my own room and rest before seeing the baby. And I was like, no, like I will fly there, I will walk there, like I will wheel myself there, like get me to my baby now. And walking into that room and seeing him in the machine with literally just like his perfect body just had tubes coming out of everywhere. The little vest he had on, he was in a cryo-induced coma to stop seizures. Um, It was horrible, honestly. I've never seen my husband devastated like that. And just the gut feeling of like, it's gone terribly, terribly wrong. Um, so we had 4 days with him in the hospital, and at first it seemed like there was hope. We researched like what happens to a baby after a hypoxic event and really hoped it was something less awful than full brain death. But it was becoming apparent that there was no brain activity. We sang him every kid's song and held him as much as possible, which wasn't a lot because of the tubes and stuff. It was hard to move him, and but we would sit there. I remember just having to pee so bad, but not wanting to move, sitting there with him for 8 hours, just thinking this is probably all I'm gonna get. And so on the third day, when it we basically knew, this is not gonna work out. Um, I sat with my son and I held his hand and I'd felt his presence really strongly up until then. I could really feel him in there. And I told him that I would never trap him in a broken body, that I loved him too much for that, and that I would forgive him if he needed to leave. And I didn't feel him very strongly after that. The nurse and midwife later told me they were standing by the monitoring equipment just on the other side of the window at that moment, and that was the first and only time my son Wilder showed any brain activity. So I know he heard me, and I know that's when he left. And then the next day, we did a little ceremony, I guess a death ceremony for him. We took him outside into the sunshine and introduced him to our dog, and we sat as a family and we sang him "All You Need Is Love" by the Beatles. And then they took the tube out of his mouth and they put him inside my little pocket kangaroo shirt. And I felt his skin on my skin for the first time. And he stopped breathing and he died in my arms. And then they couldn't let him go. They wheeled me back in to the hospital. I remember closing my eyes all the way up. I didn't want to make eye contact with anyone in the hallways. I held my son for about an hour when we got back to my room alone. I didn't want anybody in there. And then people came back in and people started to leave the hospital, like whole family, dad, mom, stepmom, mother-in-law, um, my doula and midwife were both my good friends, and everybody just started to leave. And we decided to go to because we had to catch a ferry home and it was getting late. We were tired and it had been 4 days. And I just really regret not staying the night with him. It just felt so wrong. And so, yeah, it just felt so wrong to just wrap his little body up and walk out of the room. But that's what we did. We went home to our home that had been cleaned by our friends and filled with flowers and food and love. And we did feel so loved.